Hello everyone and welcome to the Mary Black Gallery here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Currently on display is the solo show titled Codex II by Canadian textile artist Tina Struthers. Please allow me to introduce Struthers herself as she will take us on a tour of these intriguing complex works. Each one holds layers of rich conceptual thinking and intricate details. Within the details and form is a strong sense of materiality and understanding of her practice. Struthers' large-scale textile sculptures and murals explore the uncertain and mutable consequences of humans on our environment.
Good afternoon. My name's Tina Struthers. I'm a visual and textile artist based in Montreal, Quebec. And it's a great pleasure for me to do a walk through my exhibition Decay 2 that's hosted by the amazing staff of the Mary E. Black Gallery in Halifax, Nova Scotia. In front of us we have the installation piece Decay, which draws reference as many of my work on climate change and climate change issues. With this installation, I was drawing reference of my childhood memories of the kelp along the Cape Coast in South Africa, and how as a young child scuba diving underneath this, it became quite frightening. In my installation, I have hand-beaded accents, and it almost becomes like corpses of these animals. And the shadow effect on the floor for me is really important, the way the work is lit and installed to create a larger than life effect and to really bring home this feeling of fear and discomfort as we move around it in the space. I always have this strange feeling that we're not afraid enough of climate change, and I think if we feared it more, we would be pushed into action more often. In the construction of these works, as I do with many of my dimensional pieces, I use a variety of textiles, and in this work predominantly I worked with synthetic fibers to draw an abstract reference to the impact of the textile industry on the climate and especially marine life, as there's still so little control of the textile production industry and the waste that then gets spilt into waterways. As you can see, I've layered various types of textile. There's some taffeta, lycra, spandex, and then there's some wool accents in these works to add to the textural quality of it. I often bring in this spiky element in my work. It, to me, is this play on self-protection, like thorns and horns that we so often find in fragile species, and reproducing them in textile where they're soft and harmless, I find creates an interesting contrast and an interesting metaphor for how fragile we actually are, even though we try and camouflage it. In the front, we have a few pieces in cloches, which I'll get back to in a minute. And we're slowly going to be approaching Amance. Amance is an installation piece that I created in 2017. The word amance actually comes from Latin for lover. And as you circulate around the piece, you will see that you can actually see inside it, into its core or its womb. And there's a lot of surface texture work inside there to draw the viewer in. I've actually exhibited this piece before where I invited people to touch it, and within a few seconds for sure everyone sticks their hand into it, and then once they learn what the title is, they rip it out in disgust. It took a lot of time to work on the texture. Is all hand stitched in this work, And I kind of investigated this feeling of metamorphosis in natural organisms and imagined how climate change and pollution and chemical waste could potentially cause organisms to mutate and transform. And I played with this concept of not a masculine nor a feminine creature that can reproduce itself, and that's invites us through, prickles our curiosity, but also repulses us at the same time. I use the black on the back of the artwork to draw reference if you research the dead zones in the oceans, which there I bring it back again to the impact of the textile industry on the natural environment, where chemicals and waste materials gets put into waterways, and where it spills into the ocean, it's actually killed all the oxygen in the water, which leaves a dead zone. And everything literally almost turns black. In the front, we have, these are new works. And it's interesting for me, they were created before the COVID crisis, but this concept that they're contained in these glass jars and we're looking at them from a distance. So we're keeping ourselves safe, and they become like blood vessels or intestines, organic matter, and we're observing them through this glass barrier. On the wall, we have Unbound, which is a new work created in 2020 at the start of the year. It draws reference of a visual memory of mine, actually from the story of the Sleeping Beauty, and the wall of thorns that grew around the castle during this 100 years. And it becomes this barrier with the leather spikes, which reminds a little bit of medieval armor, but reminds also visually of organic dead matter and how we are bound to nature, where it almost becomes a prison, a fake feeling of protection while we're sleeping. And the world's busy changing faster than we'd like to admit. I also play here with this idea of using soft fabric to represent something that's hard and armor-like. So this contrast that it's limp, it will not protect you. In the foreground here, we have a piece from 2017 called Floss. It's also part of my specimen series, and plays with this idea of a dried flower. I did a lot of detailed hand stitching in this. In this piece, actually, I used to work in costume for theater for many years, and this piece actually quite strongly you can feel this connection to theatrical costuming in the layers and the textures. I very often mix synthetic and natural fibers. There's silk and synthetic fibers in this piece. And after constructing my form, all my surface texture is hand stitched. As you can see, as we come closer, it's a good piece. And we're seeing a little bit of the back of the gallery now. And we're approaching this mini textile piece called Borderline. Borderline was created in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And as with the rest of the exhibition, where I'm working with this human impact on the natural environment, this refers to poaching and the ivory trade that's still ongoing, which is very often doesn't make mainstream news. If you go on Google and you do a quick search on how many elephants are poached in Africa per day. It's quite shocking when you realize that almost 100 elephants are poached in Africa every day. And in that little piece, you could see the barbed wire little hooks, and it refers to fences that play borders, imaginary borders, human-created borders that serve no purpose to protect the natural world. In the foreground, we have Veribus, which is a layered textured work from 2018. It's very much the start of the new direction in terms of using far more organic forms in my mural artworks. And I really explore the idea of flow, of the flow in the currents of the ocean and the way debris and waste is transferred. I also draw reference on natural disasters, lava flow, floods, mudslides, for example, that bears no reference to man-made borders, and how this becomes very much a global problem, a global pandemic. And once again, I play with a lot of different textures. I used a lot of reclaimed materials in this piece. I used VHS cassette tape that I knitted, reclaimed leather, linen, buttons, metal wire. I love using buttons. Buttons for me, I always somehow like to imagine that each button has a different individual story to tell. And I wonder what we would learn from them if we could hear all these stories. In this piece, I work a lot with positive and negative space as well. I think I draw a lot of reference of this. There's holes in things, and somehow I think we learn to rework and rebuild and reconstruct past any devastation. It's a natural, the human strength, but also the human path to try to rebuild and reconstruct. We're approaching some newer works in the corner there, and then on the image on the background you see the piece mapping the holes in my heart, which I work a lot with the concepts of loss and displacement and migration, and how we weave together a new life across the open spaces, the holes that's left from longing and missing others. In the foreground here we have works from my specimen series that I started working on in 2017, and it's ongoing. It's all imagined creatures that are in metamorphosis, and I work a lot with this idea of waste and pollution, and what is the invisible impact of this that we are not aware of, and how could it make cells change and mutate and grow. And as you can see on this piece in front of us, it has multiple eyes, and it's looking back at us through the glass dome. It was really interesting for me as well with COVID and all the plexiglass panels that are separating us, the way you have to visit your loved ones through a glass window because we want to protect them and we need this distance. So we're almost pushed to a point where we're just observing each other and not really connecting and interacting with each other. And yet the presence is felt. We almost feel more comfortable observing these mutations through the glass. It gives us a fake sense of security. I use a lot of hand stitching details in my sculptural works and work often with beads and embroidery thread. It's a very organic process. On the wall is a series of works where once again I did an exploration with the shadows. I'm so thrilled that the gallery installed them in such a dynamic way with the lighting, where you really get this other dimension of the shadow play. And I love this reference to our childhood, where at night through our imagination we scare ourselves with shadows, with the known that becomes unknown, that becomes alive in a different way when night falls, when the light changes and shifts. These two pieces are part of a series of work called 7x7, which I created in 2017. 3 of the works have actually since been sold. 2 of them traveled to South America for exhibitions, and then there's these 2. And I actually destroyed 2 of the panels. It was an extremely painful process to create. I work a lot with the layering, peeling back layers of skin to get to the truth. The way that we're all the same underneath and all have the same basic needs of love and nurturing and nourishment. And how the skin's shredded and built back. It was created in a difficult personal time for me, and I work a lot with wire brushes where I shred and destroy the fabric, and it becomes a very physical, liberating process. It's almost like a self-healing process to sew a piece of cloth with all the layerings and then physically destroy the work you've just done, to deconstruct it and make it raw again. It becomes really a metaphor for me for the raw emotion that we so often try and hide in times of trauma, and invisible emotional scars that stay inside us for so much longer than the physical scars have healed after trauma and loss. You can see here that I use a lot of beadwork and hand and machine stitching in between. And then I literally shred through the layers of fabric and destroy it with a metal wire brush. You often end up with your hands rather shredded after the whole process too. I dip dyed the pieces as well after, so you can see there's a slight ombre effect, degrading to darker at the bottom, and the round circles refers to the passage of time and the passing of the lunar cycles. In the foreground here, we're approaching a few newer works. The 2 scaly lower pieces are all made of reclaimed buttons and lycra. And in the foreground, another piece of my specimen series. These pieces become like skins, layered with scales to offer protection. I use the recycled buttons as a base in these works, and we're not quite sure if they're alive, if they're organic, if they're rocks, but it almost becomes like a curled up cocoon protected by scales. A skin with this piece, as we can see inside it as we're turning around it. It has such a good weight when you're actually working with it and holding it because of the materials used. And on the inside of this one, you can see the red hand stitched, and there's some fur detailing, which gives us a raw, fleshy feel as we enter into the work. So I play again with this idea of an outer shell, the way we pretend that we're strong when often we're very vulnerable on the inside. And I think if we were less afraid to admit to our vulnerability, it would be easier to create real connection with others around us. I'm continuing working on this series of works in my studio at the moment, and I've actually been exploring with concrete and then these scaly pieces, and I'm really working on this theme of strength and fragility and all the layers thereof, this complex relationship amongst us with others and within ourselves. And there's an overall view of the gallery. I would love to thank the Mary E. Black Gallery, the staff and curator, and for the installation of this work, and the Craft Council of Nova Scotia for the amazing opportunity to show my work here, and especially to the gallery staff for making this exhibition possible and memorable during this difficult times of the global COVID pandemic. Thank you very much for joining me for the tour.
Codex II by Tina Struthers was hosted at the Mary E. Black Gallery in Halifax, Nova Scotia, from May 21st to July 12th in 2020. We hope you enjoyed this virtual tour of the gallery as part of our online programming.